You're listening to LeaderCast, episode 87. Welcome to LeaderCast, Transforming Missions podcast with Tim Bias and Sara Thomas, providing you with insights and resources you need to lead a movement of Jesus followers. You have skills. You also have gifts.
Well, what's the difference?
Well, I'm glad that you asked.
Before we answer, let me remind you that in this episode, we're going to answer the question, what do skills and gifts have to do with calling? We'll give you 3 steps to take as a leader to improve how you use your skills. How you use your skills and your gifts in living out your calling, whether you are called to pastoral ministry or called to be a tree surgeon. Now, we'll have more on that in just a minute. This episode of LeaderCast is brought to you by Dare to Lead, a training experience for Christian leaders to learn the skills you need to be a brave leader and create a courageous culture at church, at home, and in the workplace. It's just one way we help provide resources and coaching for you as Christian leaders in changing times. You can find resources for this episode, including a transformation guide at transformingmission.org/087. Now, we encourage you to become a LeaderCast Insider. You'll get the transformation guides included in your weekly email. You can also subscribe to LeaderCast on your favorite podcast player. Now, we know that being a Christian leader in the midst of changing times brings challenges, and we're here to help resource and coach you in becoming the leader God has created you to be. Now, Sara, will you answer the question? What difference does it make? What are the differences?
What difference does what make? Oh, what are the differences between skills and gifts? So think of skills as things that any of us can learn. So that tree surgeon that you mentioned, let's say you have a tree that needs to come down. If you wanted to, you could learn the skills to cut down the tree, including how to position the ladders, how to harness yourself for safety, how to use the chainsaw. And I'm totally making this up because I have absolutely no idea how to cut down a tree. But you could learn how to cut down a tree so it doesn't do damage to you or any other things or humans around you. Those would all be skills. Gifts, and I may also say talents during this episode, so if you hear me say gifts or talents, I'm speaking about the same thing, are the way that you naturally think, feel, and behave.
So let's try another one. Let's say that you're a welcome and hospitality coordinator. You may have the gift of hospitality. Yes, Amy, we're thinking of you. It's a natural part of how you think and behave. Gifts can't be taught, but they can be nurtured.
And here's the thing about that. If we don't have the opportunity to use our gifts, they can go dormant. They can also become weaknesses. And when I say weakness, what I mean is that it's something that's causing a problem for you or for others. If it's tripping you up and not allowing you to get your work done or getting in the way of your group or team, it's become a weakness.
So what do skills and gifts have to do with your calling? Skill does not determine the call. The call determines the skills. Gifts can determine your call.
So why don't you say that one more time, Tim?
We'll say it again because it's important.
Exactly.
Skill does not determine the call. The call determines the skills. But gifts can determine your call.
So let me ask you a question, Tim. Do you have the gifts or skills to be a tax accountant?
I do not have any gifts whatsoever to be a tax accountant. I do have some skills of adding and subtracting, but I think there are more skills needed to be a tax accountant. And because I don't have the gift, I go to someone to have my taxes done for me.
I was just going to say, so hint to anyone listening to the podcast, don't ask Tim to help you with your taxes.
So, Sarah, do you have the skills and the gifts to be a physical therapist?
So, little known fact about me is I actually went to college to be a physical therapist, was preparing to graduate with my undergraduate degree in health science. And the only way you could get a health science degree was to continue on into the Masters of Physical Therapy program at the time. So yeah, I did have the gifts and skills. I had wonderful evaluations from the people that I worked with and from my teachers that I was studying under. I was even the president of the physical therapy club. But
did you have a calling for this?
Absolutely not. There was not anything about being a physical therapist that I enjoyed, that I liked, that I looked forward to doing. To me, and I know that physical therapists are very helpful to people. I've watched how they've helped friends and family members, but for me, it felt like I was torturing people, and so it tortured me. So no, it was not a calling. So you might have skills and you might have gifts, but it still might not be a calling.
So maybe another way to think about this is, what do you get paid to do? There are likely skills that you have for your business, industry, trade, career, or calling. Skills like a gardener, a plumber, a programmer, a tax accountant, a physical therapist,
a tree
lawyer,
surgeon,
pastor, mechanic, realtor. Those all may be skills, and you may be paid for those. And you've learned how to develop the skills to live into those kinds of, I'm not going to say vocation, because I think vocation's the giftedness.
In every area of work, you might have skills specific to the work that you are being asked to do. Our gifts, on the other hand, are, again, a natural part of who we are. So here's one that I use sometimes with gifts. So, Tim, if I were to say to you, well, you've already indicated this, but I'll ask it anyway. If you had to choose between numbers and words, which would you choose?
Words.
So that may point to being more right-brained, or that creative side of our brain. The left brain is more analytical. Now, here's the deal, folks. We're all a combination of both, but most of us lean in one direction or another. Like you, Tim, I also lean towards that right-brained type of person. I'm better at words than I am at numbers. And I even remember when I took a high school class in accounting, I might have an undiagnosed dyslexia. My tables never were correct because I was always transposing numbers. So I have to be careful with numbers. Words, on the other hand, I am much, much better with. So are there things that I could learn about numbers that could become skills? Absolutely. Would I be leveraging the way I naturally think, feel, and behave? Would you be leveraging the way that you naturally think, feel, and behave? The answer is no. Now, for those of you listening, the answer might be yes to that, because how you naturally think, feel, and behave is more wired towards the analytical. There are human differences, and the beautiful thing is God has created only one you.
So here are some challenges that we face as individual leaders and contributors to teams. I think we're gonna say three, but we're only going to look at a couple of them for this podcast. The first one is most people overestimate their capacity for skills and gifts. We need to improve our self-awareness. That includes you, the listener. We think of ourselves more highly than we ought to think of ourselves. That's one. The second one is the church is not equipping people to live into their calling. We may take a spiritual gifts test, but how are we helping people translate that into living into their vocation, living into their calling? Those are the two we'll look at in this podcast today. But there is a third one, and that is your skills don't match your calling. You need education or training. But again, that one will be another podcast.
Well, and that one's really focused on you and where you're at. So if you are being called towards something and you don't have the education or training, my encouragement would be find a way to get that education or training so that you can live into your calling. So we're not going to deal with that one, but we are going to deal with the first two of raising our self-awareness and helping the church to equip people to live into their calling. Because if you haven't heard it in what we've been talking about so far, from tree surgeons to tax accountants to pastors to welcome and hospitality, those are all callings. They can be callings. Simply because you are not serving in full-time or part-time ministry in the life of the church does not mean that you don't have a calling. Every single person has a calling. So before I start preaching about that and helping you to claim your baptism as your calling, Tim, let me ask you a question. And it was how many years ago that you started to serve as a pastor?
How old are you, Sara?
So 46 years ago, did you know how to do everything required of you as a pastor when you started serving on the very first day in your local congregation?
No, I didn't. Not at all. It only took 3 weeks of preaching and I ran out of stuff to say. So
did you have gifts, and were those gifts affirmed by the community around you?
Yes.
So you had skills that you needed to develop to serve in pastoral ministry.
I did, and some of those skills that I had to develop were around that call, or around the giftedness that I had. Even though I knew that I had the gifts, I still had to develop the skill to be able to use the gifts to their fullest.
So one of the areas that I know is both a skill and a gift for you is preaching. And I put that under the big umbrella of communication. So as you think about from 46 years ago to today, how did you nurture and learn more about that gift of communication through preaching?
Well, one of the first ways I learned about communicating through preaching was just I had to go to school to learn that, to seminary. Part of it's my culture. I grew up in Appalachia. My mother told me, well, growing up, not to story to her, so I learned to tell stories early. So storytelling is part of it. Whether I'm good or not, it's just part of it's part of the culture. And so through preaching, I've learned to tell the story or narrative or a way of trying to put sermon or preaching into story form. And that's just what I've done over the years.
And you've had some pretty special, may I say, mentors, teachers, professors in your life who taught you some skills in preaching.
Yes. They affirmed the gift and then helped me, as we would say, hone the skill. Yes.
I'm thinking of, this will sound funny, probably only to Tim, but I remember first hearing about Fred Craddock from you, Tim. And I've only known you for 10 years.
Well, Dr. Craddock had a great influence on me because he taught me, even though I thought I was a storyteller, he taught me how to tell a story. And he also taught me how to listen to what's around me so I could hear the story and what was going on around me, whether it's in people's lives or even in television shows. What do you listen to help you watch and be interested in what's on television? I mean, so it was a way of, again, affirming a gift and being able to sharpen the skill to communicate. So
I had been in ministry full time for almost 10 years when you introduced me to Fred Craddock, and I opened up his wonderful volume called Preaching. And what I remember at that time was thinking, oh my gosh, my seminary education failed me. How have I been preaching for 10 years? So I say that to say I had learned a skill in one way, but in another season of living out my vocation, living out my calling, other people, you, came along in my life and introduced me to other people who taught me new skills and taught me new ways to think about preaching and teaching. And so simply because we learn the skills once doesn't mean we can't continue growing in them.
So let me add to what you're saying there. You may have learned something from Craddock through me, but because of the way you use words and the way you write, I've learned to tell story even more through writing than through oral presentation. And some of that's because of what I've learned from you and some of the things that we've learned for podcasts and communicating. So the gift is there, the call is there, the skill continues to be developed for whatever context or whatever the need is.
And so we'll get to that again and when we talk about helping you to develop your self-awareness and moving towards appreciation and application as well. But we want to give you an example also that is not a ministry context.
And that I was going to ask you to do that. You started before full-time ministry, you worked in higher education.
I did.
So how did that work with you? I mean, part of that was how did you know everything there was to know about? Well, I think you worked with freshman orientation, didn't you?
So I was a 21-year-old responsible for 18-year-olds. How did I know everything? I didn't. There was a good reason why I was a graduate student and then an assistant director and not the director of orientation. There were people around me that helped me to learn the skills that I needed to nurture my natural gifts at the same time as learning some of the skills of administration, how to lead meetings and how to facilitate a classroom of college students, how to speak in front of 3,600 people all at the same time, how to plan a move-in day on 4 different parts of a college campus when all you have to get from one end of campus to another is a golf cart. And those keys have been taken away from you because you might have had an accident with one of them. You'll have to ask me for that story at another time.
Oh, that's another podcast.
So here's what happens in a natural order and what we can be more intentional about focusing on. We come to recognize that awareness, appreciation, and application of our skills and our gifts lead to transformation for both you and for the people around you. So in essence, it's helping you become who God created you to be. So for the rest of this episode, that's what we're going to talk about, helping you become intentional on increasing your self-awareness, appreciating your gifts and talents, and intentionally applying them to the work you're being asked to do, whether you're at a front desk, up in trees with college students, or in a pulpit. The context doesn't matter.
So before we unpack these, if you're driving or walking, when you get home, make sure you head over to transformingmission.org/087 and download the Transformation Guide. We'll walk you step by step through these 3 areas to help you invest in your gifts, to sharpen your skills so that you can become more who God created you to be. So, Sara, let's talk about these 3 areas. What's the first one?
The first is to increase your self-awareness and awareness of the people around you. What do you know and what do you not know? So I don't care whether you're driving, whether you're walking, whether you're on a treadmill at a gym. I want you to repeat after me. Say these 3 words. I don't know. Did you say it? Because it's a complete sentence. Simply because you are gifted and called does not mean that you have to know everything. And the first place that we can increase our self-awareness is getting clear about what we do know and what we don't know. So let's take, for example, Tim, you and I have both done plenty of weddings, right? We've both also done plenty of funerals. Now, I know you have a son who's a
He's a funeral director.
Funeral director. I'm like, what's the word I'm looking for?
So I marry them, he buries them.
So, do you have the skills to embalm people or to cremate people?
I do not.
But you do have both the gifts and the skills to preside at a funeral, to help a family work through grief, and to guide them through that. Now, if that grief moves into depression, do you have the skills to counsel someone who is depressed?
I do not.
So what do we do as a pastor in that situation?
Well, part of what I need to do as part of a skill is help people get connected to the help they need to have.
Yeah. So it may sound like a silly example, but that is knowing what you know and what you don't know. You don't know how to bury people, but you do know how to help people grieve. You can help people grieve, but you're not going to help people deal with depression because it's beyond your skill set and what you've been trained to do. And it might move into the area of doing more harm than being helpful. I would say that about me or any pastor. I'm not saying that just about you. It is not our skill set. It's outside of who we are and what we are asked to do. The next question is to identify what are you skilled at and what are you not skilled at. So part of I'm going to go back to my example of higher education. Part of what I was skilled at in that role was, this will sound like a silly skill, but truly managing chaos. we had lots of moving pieces all of the time. And when I think about what I did both as a grad student and as a full-time professional in higher education, part of what I learned to do was to manage multiple projects at the same time. Guess what? That skill continued to help me when I answered a call to full-time ministry. So sometimes the skills that we learn in one place can transfer over to another area. Now, what about gifts? Knowing your own gifts and knowing the gifts of the people around you. I would say those are two sides of the same coin, because if you recognize how you are gifted or talented and how the people around you are gifted and talented, then you have the capacity to develop a team that is contributing and making their greatest contributions based on their gifts and their skills. Now listen to me closely, because this might cause some of you to fall off your chair. Not based on your position. Why would I say such a crazy thing is what some of you are thinking. I'm saying that because part of what I know about human development is when we are working in our natural area of talent and giftedness, that is our best opportunity for success. And when we are asked to do things that are outside of our natural area of giftedness, we can sometimes cause problems for ourselves or for others. And again, then it becomes a weakness. And part of what I have come to understand is that you can never develop a weakness into a strength. It's not going to happen. Hear me clearly. You need to be aware of your weaknesses and use your gifts and talents, use your skills to shore up those weaknesses, and also partner with people around you to shore up those weaknesses. So one of the ways that I often coach people to learn to manage weaknesses is, again, weakness being those things that cause a problem for you or others, is by partnering with people, by putting systems into place, leveraging your giftedness that keep you accountable, and also by learning to say, I don't know, or I don't know how. Now, that's not an excuse for not learning something that is a skill. Hear me on that one. So if there's ever a way that I can help you unlock the talents that you have and the talents of your team, reach out. I love working with pastors and church leaders to leverage their Clifton strengths to live into your mission of making disciples and transforming the world. But here's what I'm going to ask you to think about. How do you know whether or not you're living into the mission? What does your purpose look like? Is it that everybody's in a discipling relationship, so you're creating a multiplying movement of disciples? Or is it that you have 4 elements of a disciple-making pathway and you want everyone to claim one of those 4 areas for a season, let's say 6 months of ministry? Or maybe it's that you want everyone to know how to share their faith stories so they can talk to people about faith. What does disciple-making look like in your context? Now, back to the topic at hand.
So how do your gifts, your talents uniquely wire you for success? Said in a different way, what does success look like to you?
Yeah, so here are a couple of examples. So someone who has the talent or gift of empathy, connecting with and sensing how people are feeling, success for them might look like having everyone name what they're feeling or knowing what people are feeling. Someone who may be talented or gifted with an analytical talent Success might look like knowing the bottom line for your nonprofit is 0 at the end of the year. Again, you're unique. So the chance that someone else in the world is going to describe success in the same exact way as you, I'm going to tell you there's a 1 in 32 million chance. The challenge is that most of us assume everyone else is defining success or even a task the same way that we are. And that's not so. So again, this is the place where a tool like Clifton Strengths can help you begin to unpack your natural thoughts, feelings, and behaviors and to understand those of your team. So I'll end this part by saying you're 1 in 32 million. So you need to be aware of how you are wired for success and communicate it to others and be intentional. And we'll get to that on the last point in application.
There is a question that you've asked as a coach. So you've done this with me. I've heard you do it with others. Let's do it with the people who are listening.
So if you don't want to take an assessment like Clifton Strengths, here's what I often do, and I ask it a couple of different ways. I might ask you to describe your ideal day. How is it structured? Think about what you have control of and what you don't have control of. Think about the places and times that you get to use your creative energy and where you're told exactly what you need to do. Think about the space that you can get tasks done and feel a sense of accomplishment, or those places where you feel free to do what you need to do and what you do best. Each one of those are a different type of work, and the environments around them are also different. And it's likely that each one of those point to something that's unique about you and what you enjoy more than others. You may enjoy having clear directions from people and simply following a process that is repetitive. For other people, myself included, I have often said, I'm laughing because I have said this out loud to people, I would go crazy working on an assembly line, doing the same thing over and over again. Part of my nature is to do things and make them better. And in work where there is a process that you're asked to follow, it's already been perfected. So there's nothing for me to improve on. So I wouldn't get to leverage my gifts and talents in that place. So describe your ideal day. That was the first way of looking at it. If you don't know what your ideal day is, then think back on your best day ever. What were you doing? Who were you with? What was happening around you? Were you on the go or were you at your home? And with that best day in mind, I want you to take a step back and ask yourself, what made it great? It's likely what made it the best day ever points to your natural talents and your natural gifts.
So as we keep moving through this podcast, the second aspect that we want you to think about is appreciation.
Yeah, and these last two aren't nearly as long as the first one. Here's the question for this one. What do you give God thanks for that you can do that no one else can do quite like you? This isn't about being boastful. It's about gratitude and thanksgiving for your talents. And then how do you celebrate and claim who you are and who you are not? Again, I've said it multiple times, but I'm going to say it again so you hear it. There's only one you. So once you're clear on what you're thankful for about how God has created you, then how do you help others claim their skills and gifts? And Tim, you do this better than anyone that I know. The number of times that I have heard from you things like, thank you, this is the best part of my day, or a little bit sillier one. I'm grateful I get to be seen with you in public. Or you have thanked me for something specific that I have done, and you have recognized a way that I have used my gifts and talents. It is such a natural part of who you are. I would be remiss in doing this episode if I didn't say thank you for modeling that for others and using what I truly think is one of your gifts to model that and show other people how to give thanks to God for the things that God has gifted them and graced them with.
Well, thank you for saying that.
This is turning into a Thanksgiving fest.
So appreciation is a very big part, and just knowing who we are and giving God thanks for the way God's created us. That's part of the appreciation.
Yes.
But there is another part, and that's application, where we invest the skill and talent and giftedness that we've been given.
Yeah, so once you know where you have the skills and gifts, focus there, or work to develop the skills that you need so that you can focus there. If I have said this once to pastors and church leaders, I feel like I've said it a million times, and that's an exaggeration. I know it is, but stop trying to be all things to all people. Know where your talents are, and then partner with people where you have weaknesses. Use the gifts that you have to shore up your weaknesses, and don't expect anyone who has something that is causing trouble for them or others to make that become a strength. It's not how they're wired. Help them instead to use their gifts and skills to shore up those weaknesses and to identify their partners. The key here about application is being intentional. We think once we have skills and gifts that they're always there. But I'll tell you this. I was a better preacher when I was in the pulpit every week than I am today. But today, I'm a better teacher because I do that more. So, how about you, Tim? What would you say that you're better at today than, say 5 years ago?
Well, I'm not preaching all the time, and I'm not teaching all the time, but I am writing more. And I think I'm becoming a better writer because I'm being more intentional about how to write and communicate in a written form. And whether that's on paper or whether that's online, I'm learning. I'm becoming a better writer. I'm developing that skill. So
we can all continue to grow and develop our skills and gifts. And why has that happened for each one of us? I won't speak for you, Tim, but I know for me, it's because I'm intentionally using those skills. And so when I'm teaching, when I'm facilitating, when I'm coaching, I am focused on using those skills and investing in those skills and gifts that I've been given.
I'd have to say it's the same for me. But as it's the same for me, it's the same for the people who are listening to us.
So we want you to take some action. Identify one step that you might take to grow in your self-awareness. Many of you have already taken the Clifton Strengths assessment, so download your results again. Look at what your top 5 talents are, and remember again who God has created you to be. That's the first thing. Second, stop right now and give God thanks for one skill or gift you've had the privilege of using today in your vocation. Yes, we're giving you permission to hit the pause button. Now, do the same for someone else you are in relationship with at work or at home. And third, identify one step that you'll take towards intentionally leveraging a skill or a gift every day over the next week. So here's an example. Every day, I'm going to exercise my strategic talent by answering one question. What are the 3 things that must get done today to move our mission of coaching and resourcing Christian leaders in changing times?
We know if you take these 3 steps, you'll grow in your awareness, appreciation, and application of the skills and gifts you have so they become your strengths. This works. So we also know this, if you're not self-aware and you can't have an appreciation for who God has created you to be, then you're not going to be successful. You may even try to think more of yourself than you ought. But what we're going to say is don't be that haughty leader. Take the time to become aware, appreciate, and apply the talents and gifts God has given you so you can be who God created you to be.
Any final thoughts for us, Tim?
I think I just gave you the final thought.
All right, so let me remind you that you can find the transformation guide with the questions to walk you through awareness, appreciation, and application at transformingmission.org/087. And all that is left for me to say to you is go lead a movement of Jesus followers. Bye for now.